thank you very much for joining us today. So obviously you're one of the world's leading experts on intrinsic motivation. So we have lots of questions sent in about that. So my first question is, why did you start working on trying to understand intrinsic motivation in the first place?
Yeah, thanks, Spence. So I really got into this. I'm not a psychologist by background, I'm an economist, but I was trying to crack this problem of how to help teachers in emerging countries like India, Indonesia, regions like East Africa, find their passion to teach again in quite large bureaucratic government systems. And what I realized quite quickly is money, the financial side of the equation, which is what I'd studied as an economist, was only a very small part of the problem. And so in India, for example, 1 in 4 teachers wasn't showing up on a given school day, but actually pay was fine actually relative to average incomes. And so, of course, we'd obviously want better pay over time, but that wasn't the underlying driver. I realized that actually that was the core challenge. There was a lot of academic literature, but not much practical application. And the charity I founded reached about 35,000 schools, about 200,000 teachers in that work. But it gave me that insight. There's so much more in this area that to learn, and also that it's deeply transferable across sectors and contexts. And that's what my career is all about right now, applying these ideas to a wide variety of contexts as well.
Yeah, it's so exciting. And kind of leading from that, another student asked kind of what are some of the most common misconceptions about intrinsic motivation and leadership that you found kind of through your work?
Yeah, so I think the word intrinsic motivation itself is a bit of a misnomer. I think some people read it as intrinsic means I have it or I don't have it. And that's actually not true. What we know is that most people go into any job, any study, form of studies, for example, with usually a high degree of intrinsic motivation. It's tend to be the culture around them and the structures around them either reinforces and sustains and grows that or diminishes that over time. So the wonderful news on this is that this battle can be won, and it's definitely possible to do that at large scale. But what it does, and this goes back to the leadership point, it means how we lead has got to change as well. We've got to start leading in a way that is not just about the rational side of it, what makes the most money in a company or what makes the most logic in let's say a non-profit or government context, but also how does that decision as a leader deeply tap into to our own motivations as a person, as a team. And that's why this new concept I'm pioneering around intrinsic leadership is trying to take leadership and look at it from a more human lens, connecting to our deeper motivations and understanding that behavior as leaders ourselves.
Yeah. So you talked a bit before kind of the intrinsic motivation was developed for educators, but the audience of this interview are going to be students. So one student asked kind of what tips or strategies do you have for students who want to cultivate their own intrinsic motivation?
Yeah, I think the most important thing we're learning about, I work with a range of organizations now, Ben, from large corporates like a L'Oreal or a Skyscanner, all the way through to governments. I work with the NHS. I teach at Oxford and Cambridge, modules on intrinsic leadership. So I think what I've learned from all of that work is that what's really, really important to understand is how do we try to be all in as young people? And by all in, I mean, think of the poker analogy. What is really important, it doesn't matter really what you know by the time you join. Most of that stuff can be learned. Most companies or organizations, educational organizations, have good systems now to help develop content and teach that. What matters so much is attitude and perspective and motivation. And I think what employers are looking for is that we are genuinely all in. We're deeply curious. We care about making an impact. We have low ego. We're humble. We're willing to stretch and grow. And I think what I would say is, there's a whole discussion right now. I'm going to be a bit controversial here, but around work-life balance and those things. And I'd say put that, especially early in our careers, put that aside a little bit. What's more important is not the number of hours we work, but actually the quality of those hours, or the number of hours we study and the quality of those hours. Let's really go all into that. And by doing that, really push ourselves to the edge. We'll learn new skills. We'll develop many of the transferable areas of mastery that are really important for our development. But also we'll have a very deep impact on the world in terms of the people we're helping and serving in a role, the chance to use our education in a much broader way as well. So I think it's just really embrace a learning orientation, deeply connect with the issue at hand. Don't be transactional,
Mhm.
and don't just see your role as a student, for example, of just learning what's on the formal curriculum. So much you'll be learning is about the human skills of influencing, working together. So all the things outside on the co-curricular, extracurricular side or beyond, that's as if not more important today as well.
Yeah, I think that's excellent advice. Thank you very much. And one last question in this section. One student asked, kind of, are there any good real life examples of intrinsic motivation in action, or maybe any leaders who you think display intrinsic motivation really well? It's kind of a role model for students.
Yeah, so I was thinking a lot about politics at the moment as well. I'm doing some work on that right now as well, leadership politics. And I was watching the Matt Hancock diaries, the WhatsApp messages go out. And, I'm also, a little bit, these things are always a little bit biased either way, right? So you can't take them fully for gospel. But there's this really telling phrase that I think he used, which or allegedly used, which was that, I want to hit my target. This was about the COVID pieces. And there was some quite disturbing allegations. Again, I don't know these are fully founded, but the allegations were saying that there was some evidence that it would have been fine to reduce the lockdown periods from 2 weeks, 14 days to 5 days, and Chris Whitty was behind it. But there was a sense they didn't want to do that because they would undermine their previous staff.
Mhm.
So I think that's an example of what not to do. And I think the idea of just not really having to go in feeling that you have to prove something, show you know all the answers, that's not where leadership needs to go today. We need to be much more driven and open that we're in the voyage of the unknown. There's so many unknown unknowns out there. We have to do the best we can to navigate in that very, my words, wicked world. There's no easy technical solution. We've just got to find the best way possible and work with other leaders, other humans to achieve that. So I think that's an example where we can really see some of that work coming together and bringing it together as well.
Thank you. And now I also received some questions kind of about your career. So you've worked with lots of big companies and held various important roles. What kind of skills have you found useful in your career? And how would you suggest kind of young people set about developing those skills?
Yeah, so I think the frame I put, I'm about 40, I'm in my mid 40s, Ben, and I've gone through about 5 different career changes over that period. And what I would say is that the idea of a single career, this kind of nonsensical question we ask our young people, what do you want to do after you leave? And it's not there's not one thing, it's getting a multiple set of things. What matters, I think, is that we do everything, we're all in whatever we do.
Yeah.
And that will help us then find the next pathway and find something that deeply interests us and motivates us. So for me, the way it took me a while to understand this. My first 10 years after leaving university were really much more about going down what I call that escalator model of success. You kind of up that escalator one step at a time, one promotion leads to that. That was my mental model of life. And I realized that very quickly, that wasn't how life actually worked. Certainly not how careers work today. Instead, the idea that what's better is to have a set of career adventures where we do something very deeply. We might say 3, 4, or 5 years. Often in the beginning, it might be 2 or 3 years is enough. But something where we've made some kind of legacy. We've left a deep impact on people we're helping and serving. When we move on or leave, our teams, our organization remember us. There's a sense of sadness that we're moving on. We've achieved something from it. We've had impact in our roles. And then through the process of trying to have that impact, I've always found new things I'm excited about, new things I'm learning about. That learning to learn orientation has always served me quite well. So I went from consulting to an NGO to a startup early in my career. I went from running an NGO to writing now and trying to be more of a thought leader and a sort of a leadership expert in my current career phase. All of them built off my previous skills in quite a nice way, but I had no idea how they would build at the beginning. What I had to do was just really immerse and be curious and trust the process would help me make those steps to the next adventure.
So this leads quite nicely onto my next question, but kind of knowing what you know now about your career and how it's changed paths so many times, if you could go back in time and give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be?
I think I was very future oriented then. I think I probably still am a bit as well, but I was always looking for the next thing, what's the next path, and that actually there was some quite good things about that. But sometimes I was a bit guilty of what I see happen with a lot of young people now who are smart and talented. They're polishing the perfect CV, and they're always trying to look at the next thing with a view of what will this look like on my CV and what will it do. And I was very guilty of that, honestly, for certainly my first decade of working life. I think where my thinking has gone is I want to have real impact, and the CV will write itself, actually. So I don't want to be the person who promises a bigger thing next time. I want to deliver a great thing now, and I want to make a difference in people's lives in the here and now. We don't know how long we've got to live, and most of us will have about 4,000 weeks or so to do so. So how do we really embrace the now and really try and live life fully and purposefully and intentionally with deep impact and really helping the people we work for and serve as well.
Mhm. And I think this is maybe a good question to kind of finish on. Kind of an overarching theme is kind of you talked about having this kind of open mindset. But kind of what's the biggest challenge that you've ever faced in your career or life, and what skills helped you overcome it?
So I think I'd say probably this last career transition, I moved from running nonprofit organizations for 15 years, very roughly, to being an independent sort of thought leader, leadership expert, writer, etc. And it was, I went from one specific sector, education, which I went very deep into, to being a generalist now, working across pretty much every sector. I went from running a very large team of about 150 people to working for myself and not having a team. So pretty every possible sort of spectrum on this changed quite dramatically. And what I think I learned in that piece, that it was a very challenging period. Also, I went from having a salary, I was the CEO of the organization, to learning to live as a sort of freelancer and living on kind of eating what you kill, that sort of. So a lot of just everything changed, actually. And so I think being confident in yourself and believing that what I've always agreed with my wife, for example, she's been very understanding. So I'm very lucky to have a partner who's that. But give it everything, but give yourself a limit. So I gave myself a year and said, let me see how far I can get to in a year. At the end of the year, I want to see some early traction that there were good organizations who want to work with me. I'm doing interesting, impactful work. There's some signs that it's going to be financially sustainable. I enjoy the work. They weren't final goals, but they were intermediate goals as well. That keeps us very honest, and it means that we don't sort of waste years of time on something that isn't working, but we also give ourselves enough time to be able to navigate these new waters and accept it's all a learning journey, and so much needs to be relearned as well. And it's 2 years in, I'm loving what I do now. It feels like that career feels very real now, and I'm really delighted about it. But it took a while. So that first year, especially, it was in the middle of lockdown as well. It took some navigation as well. So that's probably a career challenge I felt that I recently faced. And I think back to that learning orientation, that open mindset, that was the key to making that successful. I mean, that was the main thing, actually.
Well, that's all the questions that I have. Thank you very much for your time. It's greatly appreciated, and thank you for your great advice.
No, thanks, Ben. Real pleasure, and I hope it helps those, and hope to stay in touch with those who have a chance to hear this as well.